HanselMinutes.com. It's Hansel Minutes, a weekly discussion with web developer and technologist Scott Hanselman, hosted by Carl Franklin. This is Lawrence Ryan announcing show number 171, recorded live Friday, June 19th, 2009. Support for Hansel Minutes is provided by Telerik RAV Controls, the most comprehensive suite of components for Windows Forms and ASP.NET web applications. Online at www.telerik.com. In this episode, Scott talks professionalism with Robert C. Martin.
Hi, this is Scott Hanselman, and this is another episode of Hansel Minutes. I'm sitting today with Robert C. Martin, founder of Object Mentor, also known as Uncle Bob Martin. Uncle Bob Martin on Twitter, in fact.
Yes.
Now, you now have the dubious distinction of being the only guest who's been on the show 3 times, which is
three's the charm.
It's very exciting for you. Feel good about that.
Yes.
And we're here in Norway, and you gave a talk at the keynote.
That's right. I did.
You booted me out. I did the keynote last year, and then when they heard that you were coming, they gave me a very small closet that I could speak to a small group of people in. So thank you for that.
No problem.
And what was your keynote about?
Well, it was entitled, Are You a Professional? It was a discussion, or rather me standing on stage yelling at everybody, telling them what they needed to do to be professionals.
There was a certain revival kind of vibe about it. I mean, you had a big crowd and a big stage. We're actually here in a very large indoor soccer stadium, and you had people pretty pumped up.
Well, for Norwegians, yes.
As well as Norwegians.
There were at least 2 people clapping at the end.
They were very muted people. And were they professionals? I mean, is the gist that we're really not? This is a very amateurish industry that we are in?
To some extent, our industry is very young, and probably has not yet earned the right to call itself a profession. We don't have the kind of trappings that a profession have. We don't have the kind of disciplines that a profession has. So, for example, if you were to follow doctors around, you would notice that they have certain rituals that they perform that have been ingrained in their practice for decades. The ritual of washing hands before surgery is not simply, a doctor going in and getting a bar of soap and washing his hands. There's a deep structure to what he does. He takes the brush and he brushes up the side of his finger 10 times, and then down the side of the same finger 10 times, across the nail 10 times, and so on. And it's a ritual that other doctors watch while you do it. Pilots have a ritual of checklists and checking each other out, and they will fly very frequently with other pilots, where the role of the fly-along pilot is to check the pilot out on his way he works checklists and the way he works his controls. Mm-hmm. So there's a set of rituals and disciplines and accepted behaviors that other professions have. And we don't seem to have that level yet, although we're getting them. Especially with the advent of extreme programming and agile development, we have begun to adopt some fairly stringent disciplines, things like test-driven development. And although it's not universally accepted, where it is accepted, it has become a discipline and a mark of a professional. Test-driven developers know each other, and they watch how each other does the testing, and we question it and say, oh, you do it that way. Well, I do it this way. And there's this bond, kind of the secret handshake of test-driven developers or pair programmers or any of the other disciplines that have become common amongst agile developers. So the keynote was really about, okay, what are these disciplines and what is it going to take to really name ourselves as professionals, to call ourselves professionals? Mm-hmm. And I went through a whole set of them. And the first one I chose was from the doctor's oath, the Hippocratic oath, which was first do no harm. I said you can't be a professional if in your daily practice you're doing harm. And I talked about the 2 kinds of harm you can do: harm to the function of a program, harm to the structure of a program. And I just talked for a very long time about you need to be able to know that you are doing no harm to the function of a program. And the way you do that is to have tests. And you also need to know that you are not doing any harm to the structure of a program. And the way you do that is to constantly change that structure so that you know that it's always flexible. You are constantly, mercilessly refactoring systems, not necessarily because they need to be refactored, but because they need to remain flexible. So it's rather like moving the gears on a bicycle or driving your car for no other reason than to keep it well lubricated. And in order to make those kinds of changes, you need tests. It all boils down to tests in the end. I talked about the need for continuous learning, that software developers are like doctors and lawyers in that there's no end to the learning they need to do. You cannot learn Java, come out of school, learn Java, and think that you're a programmer and that's all you need to know. The industry moves faster than you can keep up. There are new languages all the time and new frameworks all the time. You must continually learn.
But pilots and doctors have required classes, a number of hours, and while programmers are putting, and I think we mentioned this in our last podcast, while programmers are putting, Robert C. Martin, Microsoft certified professional, certified trainer, certified job, just in order to maintain, MD at the end of your name, you need to have continuous learning. You need to, and flight people are measured in number of hours. I had proposed on my blog a number of years ago, we start putting the number of failed projects that we've been on at the end of our names. One of the things I thought was significant is that you segued very smoothly. You transitioned from the word ritual into the word discipline. And initially, as you were saying ritual, I was thinking, well, I think of rituals as being, crossing yourself as you enter a church or, brushing your teeth in the morning. I mean, they have purpose, but at the same time, it becomes kind of an automatic thing. While discipline has a more formalized, intentional thing. I wonder, if there's a difference between the unconscious ritual versus the intention behind a discipline.
I think there's a difference. A ritual is something that is somewhat arbitrary, whereas a discipline has intent. So going back to the doctor brushing his fingers 10 times, why is it the number 10? Why not 8? Why not 11? That's an arbitrary decision. But it becomes a ritual. It becomes ingrained. It's something we do just because we do it. Test-driven developers, why do we write our tests first? Why don't we write our tests just after? Well, there's a reason behind that. There's a discipline behind it, but it also becomes just a ritual, something arbitrary. Why do we like our methods to be 4 or 5 lines long? Well, there's a reason behind that, but why is it 4 or 5 and not 8 or 9? That's a ritual behind that. So there are rituals that are arbitrary and they identify us. They're decisions we've made and we don't care to challenge again.
So in the last 100 years, using the doctor metaphor and taking this as far as we can, it was the creation of antibiotics, but also the simple washing of hands. The idea that if we're going to do surgery, why don't we just make sure the room's clean? That was kind of like if there was one thing in the last several hundred years that we've got right around medicine, it's like, let's be tidy. But is it testing? Is test-driven development and keeping tests such that we can feel confident in our systems? Is that the invention of penicillin? Is that the invention of the germ? Is that washing your hands? Have we not been washing our hands for 50 years of coding?
And that's a really interesting analogy.
You can use that in the next keynote.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It may be that testing or test-driven development is the antibiotic, is the miracle cure. And obviously it's not the miracle cure, either of them, but maybe that is the revolution. It's certainly significant. And I have been quoted a number of times saying that if you're not doing test-driven development, it's very difficult to call yourself a professional. And Jim Copleen called me on the carpet for this one. He didn't like that I said that. In fact, his position right now is that test-driven development is destroying architectures because people are writing tests to the abandon of any other kind of thought and tearing their architectures apart in the mad rush to get tests to pass. And he's got an interesting point. That is an interesting way to abuse the ritual and lose the intent behind the discipline. So he and I had a lovely debate at MIT about 6 months ago, where we explored that issue in some detail. And of course, Copleen is a brilliant fellow, and I love him to death, and two of us are good friends and always will be. And although I don't think we settled the issue between us, there was a mutual understanding.
I don't see how, I mean, playing devil's advocate, playing his role, I don't see how that's a defensible position, though.
Oh, that testing,
Well, I mean, I guess testing is rooted in pragmatism, and architecture, while it likes to think of itself in being rooted in pragmatism, is really rooted in another sense of the aesthetic. There is the engineering of the building, and then there's the making the arches pretty and making the whole thing feel good. And finding the balance between, like, hey, wouldn't it be great if all these walls were curvy? Well, that wouldn't be structurally sound. No, but wouldn't it be great? One could say that means that basic engineering practices in the building of buildings is destroying the aesthetic of buildings themselves. But you still need them to stay up and not collapse under their own weight.
Yeah, I think Coplin's point, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, is almost the exact opposite of that. His point would be that if you're not thinking through the architecture, if what you are doing instead is ignoring architecture and throwing tests together and getting them to pass, you are destroying the thing that will allow the building to stay up, because it's the concentration on the structure of the system and solid design decisions that help the system maintain its structural integrity. Mm-hmm. And he's right about that. You cannot simply just throw a whole bunch of tests together and make them pass for decade after decade after decade and assume that your system is going to survive. We don't want to evolve ourselves into hell. Mm-hmm. So a good test-driven developer is always conscious of making architectural decisions, always thinking of the big picture. Ron Jeffries likes to paraphrase a saying, which was, act locally but think globally. Mm-hmm. Right.
Both in life, but also in your code.
And in your code. Yes.
Oren Eni, also known as Allende Raheen, is walking around yesterday wearing a T-shirt that proudly declared himself as a non-coding architect.
Oh, I didn't see that. I would have given him a lot of S about that.
Well, and that's why I'm bringing it up today, so we can capture that on tape. But I thought that was quite a funny thing. I think, of course, everyone knows that there are a few people on the planet who can code like this gentleman. So I think that was a bit of a push to those non-coding architects out there. It also had a picture of a Pegasus. I'm not sure if there was a mythical.
I saw the Pegasus. I just didn't read the other part.
Yeah. So underneath, I'm not sure if the message there is.
This creature does exist. Non-coding architects, they exist, like flying horses do.
So, the gentleman that you were having the argument with,
Coplin,
who we do not want to put words in his mouth, but sometimes when I find myself on site at large enterprises, as a former enterprise architect myself, I really want to just stop talking about Visio and UML and tear the whiteboards down and just start writing some code. And I'm wondering if either maybe just I'm a lousy architect, or there aren't enough architects that really can code. It seems like one is, how they would say that one is promoted to the level that is appropriate to their own incompetence.
Yes, the Peter principle. Yes.
Right. That does that apply to architecture as well?
Unfortunately, I think it does. In a lot of cases, people who used to be programmers have graduated to become architects, and they start drawing diagrams and designing APIs and handing them to programmers, and have divorced themselves from the necessity of making things work.
So then someone might argue that in test-driven development, we're getting into a certain kind of wag the dog situation here, where someone thinks that they're in charge, but all these developers are down there writing tests, and they're pushing back against my master plan.
More likely, they're just ignoring it altogether.
Which they probably doing regardless of whether they're writing tests.
Yes, I don't think it's the tests that have anything to do with that. Good architects, in my opinion, are architects that do think about the high level. They do go to whiteboards. They do draw UML on the whiteboards. They're thinking about large scale structure. And then they're the first ones to write the code that makes sure that actually works. Right. And then they pair program with others to show them how these structures fit together. And they live in the trenches with the developers for at least a certain amount of time. Mm-hmm. And then perhaps they go back and they design another high-level structure and then dive right back down into the trenches. An architect that loses coding skill becomes irrelevant.
Hi, this is Scott Hanselman with a word from our sponsor. Do you know how to build Web 2.0 AJAX applications with Web 1.0 components? You really can't. If you want to do the next generation web applications, you'll need next generation components, just like the ones that our friends at Telerik have got. They're RAD controls for ASP.NET Ajax. It's a huge pack of web controls built on top of ASP.NET Ajax that'll add previously impossible performance and interactivity to your next project. The new controls mirror the Ajax API from ASP.NET, so development is really straightforward. The client scripts are shared, so loading time is not a problem. If you just set a couple of properties, and you'll be able to automatically bind to web services for a really efficient operation. The new RAD editor from ASP.NET Ajax Telerik loads up to 4 times faster than before, and the new RAD grid handles thousands of records in just milliseconds. But as always, it's best to try for yourself. So you can visit telerik.com/ASP.NET Ajax and download a trial. Thanks a lot. Yeah, it's interesting. I've always tried to learn how to be a better manager, and for some reason I'm definitely a manager by walking around. Management by walking around is, I just love it when I'm working for a company where the president of the company comes down from the corner office and he says, "Hey, what's cool?" I mean, I had a president like that at my last company, that he would just literally pop into your office and say, "All right, well, show me what you got today." And one day we might show him a continuous integration system, and one day we might show him, just some garbage collection thing that we thought was particularly neat, and he appreciated that. And when I work at companies where it's clear that the people in charge have absolutely no idea how the entity that they run truly works, I ask myself, is it necessary for the architect to understand the work of the plumber and the electrician? Or, can one be successful with, at what level of abstraction in the entire stack do you stop? You can't know the whole thing, right? Like you look at like Windows 7 and you've got Steven Sanofsky, who used to be an MFC programmer. He was a C++ programmer who basically designed and wrote the foundation classes. Now he's a senior VP designing all of Windows 7. Is it possible for him to know the entire thing, or appropriate?
No, it's not possible for him to know, and not appropriate for him to know the whole thing. On the other hand, even though he's designing the whole thing, I think it would be appropriate for him to be able to dive down into detail for a day or two and make sure that at the bottom level, these decisions that he's making at the top level make sense. He should, to some extent, live in the bed that he's making for everybody else. That doesn't mean he has to be down there, months at a time.
Right.
But he should be able to look at that code down there, write a little bit of it, and see the pain that he's creating for everybody else.
And that's good that you're saying that, because that's in fact what I see as an internal developer, as an internal person who's watching the mailing lists. On the public mailing list, you'll get a note from Sanofsky one day, not as coming down from, corporate VP world, but he'll say, "Yeah, I went to Fry's and I paid $800 and I put together my own PC today and I installed Windows 7, and here's the 2 things that didn't work. Here's the stack dump. Here's what I think," and he's coming in as Joe user, the enthusiast who assembled a PC.
Good.
And then you'll see the responses from people that are like, "Should we respond to the senior vice president of the?" But he's a geek just like us. So then I'm thinking, well, this is how it's supposed to be.
I think it is how it's supposed to be. As long as you are responsible for technical matters, you better be able to handle it at the bottommost level as well as the top.
So, going back to the professionalism argument, I'm trying to figure out in the stack from the top, whether it be the architect or the vice president or the business person, all the way down to the apprentice. We talked a little bit about the notion of coming up with a formalized journeyman program and an apprenticeship for programmers. How do we bake professionalism in to the entire stack?
Well, I think the choice of the word apprentice there is a very good one, because I think professionalism is baked into the stack by example. A young person coming out of school should not be thrown in a room, should not have meat thrown in and expect code to come out. They should be coupled with someone slightly more senior, taught the ropes. There should be a lot of pair programming, a lot of code reviewing, mentoring and coaching. And then at every level thereafter, there should be a mentoring association. Everybody should know who their mentor is at every level going up the chain, so that you are inducted into the halls of professionalism by people who know it better than you do. I don't think you can take classes on this. I don't think you can absorb it from books. Some of the things certainly you could get from books, but the real heart of discipline is in working with someone else and absorbing their sweat into your skin.
like the residence program that one has to go through to become a doctor.
I think so, yeah. I mean, think of those guys. They're coupled together with their residents, and they go through hell to learn that stuff.
So this might be a backwards way of thinking about it, but it's also got me a little sad. I'm trying to think of a less professional vocation than ours. I mean, even a construction worker,
yes.
You give him his tool belt and his very first roofing hammer, and then you assign him a mentor, and then he goes and he figures it out.
Yeah.
Even the guy at McDonald's that works the fry-olator is assigned a mentor and works his way up to burgers and then possibly the drive-through window.
Yep. But nope, out of school.
Are we the least professional profession that there is?
Coming out of school, you're expected to know everything and be able to do everything. I don't know if we're the least. We're very young.
Wow.
And the companies that are trying to make use of software really haven't figured out how the heck they're going to do that. Mm-hmm. And we as programmers, most of us came out of school or came out of wherever and we thought we owned the world. And really haven't understood that we needed to have this level of discipline until perhaps the last 5 years.
Why the last 5 years? What was special about the late 90s? Was it the bubble that caused this to happen?
I think the bubble might have been a stimulus of it. But I think probably more important than that is you've got a bunch of people like me who have been programmers for damn near 40 years. And we're looking at the situations we've created and realize that, wait a minute, you just can't do this anymore. Mm-hmm. We can't be the way we were because we've got to keep on leading the software profession into the next several decades.
Did you get tired? I mean, I've been doing this for, 17 years, and I'm tired. I'm ready to be done. I want to be an architect. We don't have to.
No. I want them to find me with my nose stuck between the keys of the keyboard. I want to code. And everything else I do is ancillary so that I can go back to my laptop and write code.
So as long as your hands still work, you're gonna code.
That's right.
I don't know.
See?
I'm trying to think. In the context of history, you've been doing this, you said 40 years or so, and you probably got another 40 in you. What do you think it's going to look like? Are we going to still be dicking around with text editors in 40 years?
Yeah. I think we will be dicking around with text editors for another 40 years. I don't think it'll be some radically different thing. I think the text editors will be much, much better.
Yeah. We're not going to be able to just speak. Didn't Bill Gates promise me a computer I could talk to?
I'm not sure speaking is the way we want to do that. I think we want to still maintain the precision of single keystrokes and particular characters. So I don't know if speaking is the interface.
It's just that the one-to-many interface isn't working for me. Yeah. The idea that, one token in my head or one, series of tokens, one thought, one idiom is, 40 or 50 keys. My hands hurt. I've been doing this a while. My hands hurt.
Did you see the YouTube on how to build Conway's Game of Life in APL?
No.
This was an astounding YouTube. It's wonderful to watch because this guy is describing it. And all you see on the YouTube is the screen. And he is speaking while he's typing. But he's typing much slower than he's speaking. APL is this language that has a zillion characters to it. It's like Chinese. So a whole new layout of the keyboard is necessary in order to do it. But here he is. He's typing while he's speaking, and every keystroke there are several words for.
Really?
And he winds up implementing the entire game, Conway Game of Life, in a few dozen keystrokes. Now, APL is an old language, but I think there's something to this idea of an extremely dense language where every keystroke has a lot of meaning to it. And your programming effort goes into the thought of how to assemble a very few tokens rather than to assemble massive amounts of tokens that we do now.
That's very interesting. Yeah. That's why regular expressions are so powerful.
Yes, they are. You think a long time about every single character.
Because, if regular expressions are the katakana, then what does the kanji look like, right? I mean, if the example of Chinese is excellent. The idea that one glyph can describe an entire sentence.
Yes. Yeah. And Chinese is the existence proof. Yeah. It is possible to have languages where you have very meaningful glyphs.
Right. Well,
Right.
People who speak English or who use Latin-based languages or transliterations are used to using, 2, 3, and 4 characters to make one sound. People who use syllabaries like katakana, like Ethiopian Amharic, like Hebrew, like Arabic, can make one glyph and get, the equivalent of 2 sounds, a consonant and a vowel. Or you might as well just say, look, that picture means rock.
Mm.
Or I guess was it in Chinese? Was it the woman? There's a symbol for woman, and then you put it 3 times. It means gossip. I read that, and I think it was in Bill Bryson's book called The Mother Tongue.
I did not know that.
I think I may have got it wrong, but it was a really great book by a guy named Bill Bryson who wrote A Brief History of Everything, and he's got this great book called The Mother Tongue, and it was like 1 woman, that's a woman, 2 is a conversation, and 3 is gossip.
And a glyph of 3 men means grunts.
Yeah, basically. That's very interesting.
Think of the languages that are becoming popular right now.
Mm-hmm.
Languages like Ruby and Haskell and Clojure, and these languages are much denser than the languages that we've been used to. They're denser than Java or C# or VB,
mm-hmm.
or languages that were in the mainstream.
Well, the languages you just listed off, the last ones, C#, Java, and C++, are all essentially the same language.
Yes,
I mean, no matter what anyone
yeah.
says, it's all the same language. Pascal,
Sure.
it's just all the
C++,
same thing. Right.
C.
So, and while Ruby isn't radically different, it's definitely more than one step withdrawn.
Yes.
And then heading in the APL direction, you're right. I wonder, I have to get Anders Heilsberg on the show and say, have you thought about for each being one glyph?
A glyph.
And while you're there, just make the whole looping construct just one glyph.
Glyph. Yeah.
And then how about some significant white space, if you don't mind? That's a really interesting idea. Yeah. So, being able to express ourselves, it doesn't really change professionalism. I'm trying to think. You got me thinking about how one could express themselves in so many fewer types. Because right now we're in the process of making tooling like ReSharper and
yes.
like CodeRush,
yes.
where I can push the letter C, hit space, and we generate all this stuff. But once it's been generated there, it's just text.
The really interesting thing about ReSharper and the whole menagerie of refactoring browsers
Mm-hmm.
is that they take this glyph concept, and instead of making the glyphs elements of the program, they make the glyphs transformations of the program.
But usually only one way, and then they struggle to go on the way back.
So if you want to rename a variable, that's
right,
a keystroke.
Well, those things require that they understand too much. For example, ReSharper has basically reinvented an entire C# compiler and tokenizer all
Yes.
itself. That isn't that isn't the real one.
Yes, that's right.
So things are great, and then we introduce LINQ, which is a language within a language, and then it gets confused, right?
Yes.
So you get this transformation where you type in C, you hit space, and you get class curly brace. But maybe I want to change that into an interface. I can't change the glyph, the essence of the thing that is a class into an interface as easily, because now it's expanded. And to bring it back to its essence, its glyph form, isn't really possible. I don't know.
Well, we have a lot to explore.
Well, this is random.
Well, you never know.
What a highly unprofessional podcast that we've put on today, Uncle Bob. Well, thanks for sitting down with me here in Norway. This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, content-free, provided to you by Scott Hanselman and Uncle Bob Martin. And we will see you again next week.